There was a time when America believed it could control India with a few phone calls, some threats of sanctions, or the promise of a trade deal. For years, Washington operated under the illusion that India was a country that could be pressured into submission, that it could be treated like a junior partner in a larger geopolitical game. Donald Trump carried that same belief with him into the White House. He thought India was a piece on the American chessboard, something to move around when it suited him and push aside when it didn't. But the truth is, that world no longer exists. You see, leverage works only when the other side believes it has no alternatives. For decades after independence, India was still trying to find its footing. It was managing poverty, navigating Cold War rivalries, and building its institutions. America saw this vulnerability and tried to use it. Aid packages, political pressure, the promise of technology, all of these became bargaining chips. The U.S. assumed India would always need permission to rise, that it would always need approval from Washington. But the India of today is a completely different reality. It has grown into one of the largest economies in the world. It has built one of the strongest militaries. It is a nation that sits at the table of global decision-making, not waiting outside for scraps. This transformation means the old tools of American leverage, sanctions, trade threats, diplomatic bullying, no longer carry the same weight. Trump's attempt to apply pressure was like using an outdated playbook on a new battlefield. It simply didn't work. Trump believed he could treat India the same way America treated smaller nations, by demanding loyalty, by threatening consequences, by dangling incentives. But here's the psychological mistake he made. India has outgrown the phase of dependency. A self-confident nation does not respond to intimidation. A self-reliant nation does not fear isolation. The more America tried to push, the more India leaned into its independence. The illusion of leverage shattered the moment India showed it could say no. And that's the part people miss. Saying no is the ultimate sign of power. For too long, America thought it had the monopoly on decision-making. But India is now willing to say no to Washington when it must, just as it says no to Moscow or Beijing when it needs to. This balance is what Trump never understood. He saw the world in binaries: you are either with us or against us. India, however, has chosen a third path. You are with yourself first, and then you engage the world on your own terms. Philosophically, this is a profound shift. The U.S. has been conditioned to see dominance as the only way to lead. But India shows a different kind of leadership. The leadership of sovereignty, of independence, of self-respect. When you carry yourself with that kind of dignity, you become immune to manipulation. America's leverage becomes irrelevant because it is based on an old assumption that India needs to be guided, that it cannot decide its own future. Trump tried to play that game, but the rules have changed. Think about this in terms of psychology. Leverage is essentially control. It's one party believing it can dictate the behavior of another by creating fear or desire. But fear disappears when you have strength, and desire disappears when you have options. India now has both: strength in its economy, its military, its culture, and options in its alliances with Russia, Europe, and the global South. What does that leave America with? Nothing. No stick, no carrot. Just the realization that its old tools don't work anymore. So when Trump came in with his transactional mindset, thinking he could bully or bargain India into line, he walked straight into a wall. Because this new India doesn't play the role of a subordinate. It plays the role of a partner. And partnership is something America has struggled to accept. A partner is not someone you can order around. A partner is someone you must respect, someone you must listen to, someone you must treat as an equal. This is the moment where the illusion breaks. America thought it could control India. Trump thought he could bend India. But what actually happened is that India revealed itself as unbendable. And when a nation becomes unbendable, it becomes unbreakable. That's the real story here. The story of how India escaped the shadow of dependency and walked into the light of sovereignty. And here's the lesson we must all take from this. When you stop relying on someone else for your strength, you stop being controlled by their power. The illusion of leverage fades and real independence begins. That's not just the story of India. That's the story of every individual, every nation, every human being that chooses self-respect over submission. America thought it had leverage. Trump thought he had control. But India, through strength and sovereignty, proved a simple truth. No one can break you when you refuse to bend. When people talk about U.S. power over India, they often forget one thing: India has never stood alone. There has always been a counterbalance, a partner that made sure India could resist external pressure. And today, more than ever, that anchor is Russia. This is the part that Trump, and frankly many American strategists, underestimated. They thought India could be isolated, that it could be forced into dependency. But what they failed to see was that Russia has been the constant hand on India's shoulder, steadying it through every storm. This is not about sentimentality or nostalgia. This is about hard reality. Russia provides India with the kind of support America can never fully control, support in defense, in energy, in diplomacy. That's why every time Washington tries to tighten the noose, Moscow loosens it. Every time the U.S. raises the price of pressure, Russia lowers the cost of resistance. And this is where Trump miscalculated. He thought America's pressure was irresistible, but he didn't understand that India already had an outlet, a release valve, a shield that blunted those blows before they could do real damage. Think about defense. Over 60% of India's military equipment has roots in Russia. Fighter jets, submarines, missile systems. These aren't just hardware. They are the backbone of national security. And here's the truth: no country willingly hands over its backbone to someone who threatens it. India can't be bullied when it knows that Russia will supply what is needed, and at terms that are not tied to humiliation. That's the difference. America often attaches strings to its deals. Russia offers partnership instead of control. Now let's talk about energy. Trump believed that by squeezing markets and controlling sanctions, he could dictate where India bought its oil. But Russia turned that game upside down. Instead of bending under pressure, India increased its imports of Russian oil, often at discounted prices. It was an act of defiance, yes, but more importantly, it was an act of sovereignty. Russia gave India the leverage to say to the world, we will fuel our growth on our terms, not on Washington's conditions. That kind of independence is priceless, and it is exactly why American leverage no longer works. There is also the dimension of diplomacy. When Western institutions become hostile, Russia steps in to shield India. Whether it is on issues at the United Nations, in technology transfers, or in defense cooperation, Moscow has consistently reinforced India's position. That kind of consistency builds trust, and trust is something America often lacks in its foreign policy because its alliances are conditional, transactional, temporary. Russia proves reliability, and reliability is the greatest anchor in a storm. Psychologically, this matters deeply. A nation that knows it has a partner it can rely on does not feel fear when confronted with threats. Fear is what makes leverage effective. Remove the fear and leverage collapses. India does not fear isolation because Russia guarantees that India will never be isolated. This is why Trump's tactics failed. He thought he could intimidate. But intimidation works only when there is no safety net. Russia is India's safety net, and it is strong enough to carry the weight of American pressure. Philosophically, this also reflects a deeper truth. Balance creates freedom. If you are locked in a single relationship, if you depend on one source for everything, you become vulnerable to control. But when you diversify, when you find balance, you gain freedom. Russia gives India that balance. It ensures that no single power, no matter how loud, no matter how aggressive, can dominate. This is how sovereignty is preserved, not by standing alone, but by choosing allies who respect independence. And here is the irony: Trump wanted to portray himself as the master negotiator, the dealmaker who could bend nations to his will. Yet in India's case, Russia quietly proved that the so-called art of the deal collapses in the face of strategic trust. You cannot bargain away a nation that has alternatives. You cannot bully a country that has an anchor. This is why the illusion of American leverage is shattered again and again. So when people ask why India does not bend to U.S. pressure, the answer is simple: because Russia stands beside it. Because Moscow provides the backbone, the energy, the trust, and the balance that make India immune to threats. This is the piece Trump missed, and it is why his attempts failed before they even began. And here's the thought I want to leave you with: no person, no nation, no power can control you if you have something solid to anchor yourself to. For India, that anchor is Russia. For each of us in our own lives, it might be our values, our discipline, our vision. Anchors are what make us unshakable. And once you are unshakable, you cannot be broken. For years, America lived under the illusion that it was the only game in town. After the Cold War, when the Soviet Union collapsed, Washington believed it had the monopoly on power. And in many ways, it did for a time. It dictated terms, it controlled institutions, it decided who was in and who was out. The United States looked at the world as a pyramid with itself at the very top, and everyone else scrambling for a place beneath it. Trump inherited this worldview, and he carried it with pride. He thought he was commanding the empire at its peak. But by the time he came into office, that empire was already fading. The reality is that the unipolar world, the world where America stood alone as the superpower, is over. The stage has shifted. New actors have stepped into the light. Russia, despite sanctions and pressure, has reasserted itself as a global force. China has risen with staggering speed, reshaping economies and alliances. The BRICS bloc has expanded, bringing countries from the global south into the fold. And India, once thought of as a developing giant still finding its footing, is now one of the decisive powers shaping the future. Trump never adapted to this reality. He believed he could still play the old game of dominance, but the board had changed and the rules no longer favored him. This is what makes America's attempts to pressure India so outdated. In a unipolar world, the US could threaten sanctions, cut off access, or isolate countries, and those countries had nowhere else to turn. But today, alternatives exist everywhere. If Washington says no, Moscow says yes. If America raises costs, Russia lowers them. If one alliance excludes, another alliance welcomes. That is the essence of a multipolar world no single power has the ability to control. Trump's failure was believing he still had the monopoly, when in truth, America is just one voice in a crowded room. Psychologically, this is a critical shift. For decades, the US operated from a position of supremacy. Supremacy conditions the mind to believe that control is natural, that others will always obey, that the hierarchy is fixed. But when supremacy is challenged, when the monopoly dissolves, the psychology of power must change or it collapses. Trump did not change. He clung to the old mindset of dominance. He demanded loyalty. He threatened consequences. He believed pressure would bend nations to his will. But India was no longer living in that reality. India was already operating in the multipolar mindset where you don't bow to one power, you balance them all against each other, and in doing so, you rise on your own terms. Philosophically, this shift is profound. A unipolar world is based on control. A multipolar world is based on negotiation. In one, you have a master and subjects. In the other, you have partners, competitors, rivals, and allies, all woven into the same fabric. Trump saw only the old hierarchy, and he assumed India would stay in line. But India saw the new landscape, and it understood that freedom comes from options. Multipolarity gives you choices. And choices destroy control. This is why America's monopoly collapsed, not because its power vanished overnight, but because its ability to dictate terms disappeared. You cannot dictate when others have alternatives. You cannot dominate when others have balance. And you certainly cannot break a country like India when it has Russia, China, BRICS, and the global south standing beside it. The monopoly is over and the multipolar world is here to stay. Now let me take this one step deeper. In life, monopoly breeds arrogance. When you are the only one, you begin to think you are invincible, untouchable, irreplaceable. That arrogance blinds you to change. But balance, true balance, breeds humility and strength. It forces you to adapt, to negotiate, to respect others. America's mistake, Trump's mistake, was arrogance. India's strength is humility paired with strategy. It does not try to control the world, it seeks to balance it. That's why India rises while others stumble. And here is the lesson for all of us: don't rely on monopolies in your own life. Don't put your future in the hands of one employer, one relationship, one opportunity. Diversify your sources of strength. Build options, create balance. Because the moment you do, you stop being controlled. You gain freedom. And freedom, once gained, is the most unbreakable force of all. Trump believed America's monopoly was eternal. But Russia, China, India, and the new global order proved otherwise. The world has changed. The board has reset. And in this new world, no one, not even America, has the power to dictate terms. The monopoly has collapsed, and India, by embracing balance, stands as living proof of that truth. The old game is over. The future belongs to those who understand the new rules. When you talk about power in the modern world, it always comes back to economics. Military strength is critical, diplomacy is essential, but at the foundation of it all is the economy. Whoever controls their economy controls their future. And this is where India has transformed itself in a way that Trump and many in Washington failed to recognize. They thought India was still dependent, still vulnerable to outside approval. But the truth is, India has built the kind of economic independence that makes it untouchable. For years, American leaders assumed India would always need the West for growth. They believed India needed U.S. markets, U.S. technology, U.S. approval to stand tall. And maybe decades ago that was partly true, but not anymore. Today, India is one of the fastest growing major economies in the world. It is building industries of its own. It is creating technologies of its own. It is investing in self-reliance through initiatives like Atmanirbhar Bharat, which literally means self-sufficient India. That's not just a slogan, it's a philosophy, a mindset, a declaration that India's future will not be dictated from outside. Trump thought he could play the trade war game with India the same way he played it with China, by raising tariffs, by threatening penalties, by acting like the U.S. market was the only game in town. But India was not China. India was already diversifying, already reaching into Asia, Africa, and the Middle East. It was making deals with Russia for energy, with Europe for investment, with BRICS for financial alternatives. In short, India didn't need to bow to American demands because it had built a world where American approval was optional, not necessary. This is a huge psychological shift. Dependency creates fear, and fear creates control. That's how leverage works. But the moment you build your own independence, fear vanishes. Trump thought he could scare India into compliance with the threat of economic punishment. But you can't scare a nation that has alternatives, that has resilience, that has the confidence to stand on its own legs. This is why India didn't bend. It wasn't just defiance, it was self-assurance. Now, let's dig deeper. Economic independence isn't only about numbers on a chart or percentages of growth. It's about dignity. A nation that feeds itself, fuels itself, and builds for itself carries a sense of pride that cannot be manipulated. And pride, when rooted in real strength, becomes a shield against outside pressure. That's what Trump underestimated. He thought India's pride was symbolic, but it was real, and it was backed by an economy strong enough to stand without American permission. And there's another layer here: global positioning. In a multipolar world, your economy is your ticket to influence. The stronger you are economically, the more seats open up at the table of global decision-making. India isn't waiting to be invited anymore. It is walking into the room on its own terms. It is shaping trade alliances, digital infrastructure, green energy policies, and even space exploration. That's not dependency, that's leadership. Trump wanted India to play the role of a customer, a market for American goods, a subordinate in trade negotiations. But India is now a competitor, a producer, a leader. And when you see yourself as a leader, you no longer accept being treated as second class. This is the philosophical shift that makes India unbreakable. It does not see itself as a follower in the American world order. It sees itself as a driver in the new global order. Here's the irony. Trump branded himself as the champion of economic nationalism, as the man who wanted to make America self-reliant again. Yet when he looked at India doing the same thing, he didn't respect it, he resisted it. But resistance doesn't stop reality. India's independence is not negotiable because it's built on the one thing every great nation must secure: control of its economic destiny. So what's the lesson here? It's not just about India and America. It's about life itself. Economic independence is freedom. When you depend too much on one source, whether it's a paycheck, a partner, or a market, you make yourself vulnerable. But when you diversify, when you build multiple streams, when you invest in your own capacity, you create resilience. And resilience is what makes you powerful. That's what India teaches us here. The reason Trump couldn't bend India was not because India shouted louder or fought harder. It was because India had already done the work to stand on its own. It had built an economy strong enough, diversified enough, confident enough to say, "We don't need your permission. We don't need your approval. We will grow on our terms." And that's the truth I want you to carry with you. Power comes from independence. Independence comes from preparation. And when you prepare, when you build your own foundation, you will never again be at the mercy of someone else's approval. Trump thought India needed America. But the truth is, India has shown the world that it needs no one. And that is the ultimate freedom. Every nation faces moments when its strength is tested, when the outside world tries to corner it, when the pressure becomes almost unbearable. For India, those moments have come time and time again. And every time Washington believed it could isolate India, Russia proved them wrong. This is not theory. This is not abstract. This is reality demonstrated in actions, in deals, in solidarity when it mattered most. Think about it. America has often used isolation as its favorite weapon. Sanctions, trade restrictions, political boycotts. This is the American playbook. Trump embraced it with full force, believing that cutting off resources would force nations to bend. But India never truly felt the weight of that isolation because Russia was always there to offset it. This is where resilience is built, not in words, but in consistent actions that protect sovereignty. Look at energy. When Washington tried to pressure India over oil, saying it should stop buying from Russia, what happened? India doubled down. Why? Because Russia stepped in with discounts, with reliable supply, with terms that respected India's independence. That single move changed the entire game. America's threats became meaningless because Russia removed the cost of defiance. And once the cost is removed, defiance becomes strength. Or take defense. At the very moment when the West tried to limit India's access to advanced weapons, Russia offered alternatives. The S-400 missile system is a perfect example. America tried to block it, tried to pressure India into rejecting it, but Russia delivered and India stood firm. That deal was more than military hardware, it was a statement. It said, "We will not be told what we can or cannot buy." And the reason India could say that was because Russia made it possible. That is resilience in action. But it's not only material support. Diplomatically, Russia has consistently given India cover when the West tried to corner it. In the United Nations, in bilateral summits and international forums, Moscow has ensured that India never stood alone. That sense of backing is critical, because psychological resilience grows from the knowledge that you are not fighting in isolation. When you know someone is in your corner, your confidence multiplies, and confidence is what turns resistance into victory. Philosophically, this is profound. Resilience does not mean never facing pressure. Resilience means withstanding pressure without breaking. And how do you do that? You build systems of support. You build relationships that hold you steady when the storm hits. That's what Russia has been for India, a support system, a shield, a constant reminder that sovereignty can be defended with partners who respect it. Trump, with all his bluster, never grasped this reality. He believed India could be bent simply because America had power. But power without leverage is useless. And leverage disappears when the target has alternatives. Russia gave India alternatives in energy, defense, and diplomacy. Alternatives destroyed America's leverage. And without leverage, Trump's threats became empty words. But let's step back for a moment. Why does this matter beyond geopolitics? Because it reflects a universal truth about resilience. Every individual, every nation, every business faces pressure from forces bigger than themselves. If you stand alone, you are vulnerable. If you build alliances, if you cultivate partnerships, if you create multiple sources of strength, you become unbreakable. Resilience is not about never being attacked. It is about never being defeated. India demonstrates this beautifully. Russia's consistent support has proven that India cannot be broken by external pressure. Instead, every attempt to isolate it has only highlighted how strong it has become. Each time Washington tried to close a door, Moscow opened another. Each time Trump tried to raise the cost of independence, Russia lowered it. That pattern has created a shield around India, a shield built not on dependence, but on strategic partnership. And here lies the deeper message. True resilience is proactive, not reactive. It is not just about surviving attacks. It is about preparing so well that attacks lose their power. India prepared by maintaining its relationship with Russia, by refusing to put all its eggs in the American basket, by ensuring it had options when it mattered most. That is strategic wisdom. That is resilience by design. So when people say Trump could not break India, the reason is clear. Russia proved through its actions that India was never as vulnerable as America assumed. Resilience was not a theory. It was reality, tested under fire and proven true. And this is the lesson for us all. If you want to be resilient, don't wait for the storm. Build your anchors, build your partnerships, build your inner strength now. Because when the pressure comes, and it always comes, you won't be scrambling for help. You will already be prepared. And that preparation is what turns pressure into opportunity and attempts to break you into proof that you cannot be broken. That's what India has shown the world, and that's what Russia has made undeniable. Resilience is not the absence of struggle, it is the refusal to collapse under it. And once you prove that, no one, not even America, can break you. There is a fundamental mistake Trump made, and it wasn't just about economics or defense or diplomacy. It was about perception. He, like many before him, looked at India as if it were still a pawn on someone else's chessboard. He believed India could be moved around, pressured, or boxed into someone else's strategy. But here is the truth that America and much of the West has been slow to accept India is no longer a pawn. India is now a power. And when you become a power, you stop playing someone else's game. You start shaping the game itself. For decades, the narrative about India was that it was a developing country, a country with potential but not yet influence, a country waiting for permission to rise. That story is finished. The new narrative is here. India is a decisive force in the global order. Nations court India now, not the other way around. Alliances revolve around India, not past it. And Russia has been one of the strongest partners reinforcing this identity, treating India not as a subordinate but as an equal. That shift in treatment, repeated and visible, has reshaped how the world views India. You see, perception is power. The way others see you often shapes the way they engage with you. And if you accept being treated as a pawn, you will always be moved like one. But when you demand respect, when you carry yourself like a power, people have no choice but to respond accordingly. India has learned this truth. It does not seek validation anymore, it seeks recognition. And the recognition is already happening. From the G20 presidency to BRICS expansion to space exploration milestones, India has shown the world that it is not just participating, it is leading. Trump, however, failed to adjust his mindset. He spoke to India with the old language of dominance, expecting compliance. But India responded with the new language of power, partnership, equality, sovereignty. That's why his pressure failed. He was speaking to a version of India that no longer exists. And in doing so, he exposed America's blind spot, the inability to see that the balance of power had shifted right in front of their eyes. Psychologically, this is one of the most important lessons. Growth is not just about numbers or achievements, it's about identity. The moment you see yourself differently, the world starts to see you differently too. India began to see itself not as a country waiting for permission, but as a country giving direction. That identity change altered everything. And when your identity shifts, no external force can reduce you back to what you were before. Trump tried, he pushed, he pressured, he threatened. But you cannot intimidate a nation that has already stepped into its power. Philosophically, this brings us to something even deeper. A pawn is expendable, a pawn is used, a pawn has limited movement, and its value is defined by the player moving it. But a power is the opposite. It is autonomous, decisive, incapable of shaping outcomes. India is no longer being moved, it is moving others. And that shift is not just geopolitical, it is symbolic of a broader truth about evolution. When you rise, when you prove your strength, when you anchor yourself in independence, you stop being a piece in someone else's game and start becoming the architect of your own. And let me tell you something, this isn't just India's story. This is the story of every person, every community, every nation that refuses to remain a pawn. Too many people live their lives waiting for permission, accepting roles that diminish them, believing they must play by someone else's rules. But the moment you recognize your own power, the moment you claim your own agency, you change the entire game. India has done this on the world stage, and that lesson applies to all of us. Russia's role in this has been critical, not just in providing resources or support, but in affirming India's identity as a power. By treating India as an equal, by reinforcing its sovereignty, by partnering instead of patronizing, Russia has helped solidify the world's recognition of India's new place in history. This is why attempts from Trump or anyone else to break India will fail. You cannot break a power that has already defined itself. And so, the illusion has ended. India is not a pawn to be moved, not a subordinate to be lectured, not a weak link to be exploited. India is a power rising with dignity, acting with independence, and shaping the future of the world. And here's the final thought I want to leave you with in life. You are either played or you play. You are either a pawn in someone else's strategy, or you become the power that shapes your own destiny. India has chosen the second path, and so should you. Because once you stop being a pawn and step fully into your power, no one, not Trump, not America, not anyone can ever break you again.